Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Impactful Conversations podcast with myself, Dr. Glenn Wallis, and my very, very good friend and co-host, Nejmi Alexander. How are you, sir? Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you, Glenn. Very well and excited for the conversation that we're going to have today.
Yeah, so me too. So we've had the great pleasure of being joined today by Jorge Dreyfus, who I've known for about a year now, and Jorge's always struck me as genuinely, I'm not just saying it because he's on the call, a very, very thoughtful and considered person around whatever it is he's talking about, an executive in the whole talent and culture space. And we're absolutely delighted, Jorge, to have you on the Impactful Conversations podcast today. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here and looking forward for a fruitful conversation with yourself, Glenn, and Nejmi.
Yeah, great stuff.
Okay, so I think today what we're really interested in is a topic that is on everyone's minds or everyone's lips when talking about the paradigm of leadership today, and it's really about an exploration. I think an interesting conversation to have is an exploration around AI and AI adoption, and in particular the leadership impact of how that happens, how we make that happen, how we help it to stick. And I understand, Jorge, that you are a senior people person from that worked at Sage for a period of time, and you recently started at Cycle. I think that's right. And so what I'd really be curious to understand, and maybe it'd be useful in introduction, is for you to share a little bit about your, how you've arrived at your interest in AI and in that topic.
Yeah, no, thank you, Nejmi. And a few things come to mind in terms of how I've come to this, interest. But obviously, as an HR professional, and I've been in the profession of human resources for 25 years, plus, doing different jobs and in different companies, different industries, different roles, usually in the talent, in the talent space. And I've seen many things come and go. I'm old enough to have experienced total quality management many years ago. I've been involved when I was with Honeywell very much in Six Sigma, type of revolutions and evolutions and improvements and and so forth. But currently, like most of us, I've never quite seen something like what we're experiencing right now. And I'm not old enough to remember what the swap between the steam engine and electricity was. Thank goodness for that. But it rings bells like that, because I think that, and though AI has been with us for some time, companies like Sitecore, where I'm very happily now, or Sage, where we spent the prior 7 years, had been working and have been providing AI solutions for a number of years. I think it is really the last 3-4 years where we have seen a huge impact. And my interest comes because I do believe, like many others, that it is going to change the world of work in an extremely meaningful way. It already is to a great extent, but I think that anyone who is interested in the world of work needs to be attuned, needs to start and be very fluent on AI and what are the impacts. I think a lot of it's still to be decided. I think we probably still have more questions than answers in terms of what the medium and long-term impact is. But it is a fascinating world that we're living in, and being curious by nature, I love to find out more, experiment with it, and be associated with companies that are doing plenty on that space.
Yeah. So if we took a bit of that experience and said, when you've tried to get people inside the organization, so it's not just the outward facing sort of product addition of AI, but you've started to encourage the employees in the organizations to adopt it. What have you seen in terms of best practice, or what have you seen that works really effectively when you want to encourage people to genuinely engage with it rather than be frightened of it and sort of steer clear?
Yeah. So I think, and this might be oversimplifying, but you can probably think about it maybe as at least two broad segments of employees that are being impacted by AI. I think there's a segment of employees where the organization early on realizes that their jobs, their tasks, their workflows around them are going to be redesigned because the power of AI is able to automate, is able to augment what they do. So you've got that section where organizational design will come to play, should come to play, where training will be, very deliberate and very specific. You think about how call centers, work, and the power of AI in that, in that setting. Software development to an extent, and the power of AI in that setting. Those jobs, with hopefully in most organizations, those colleagues are being redesigned as as such. And as part of that, if the employees, if the colleagues are not familiar with AI, they will have to be, because their tools will be there.
Yeah.
So that's one big big bucket. And then there's the rest of us, in a sense, which is no one is going to knock on our door to say, hey, we've just redesigned your job. This is how you should be doing it from now onwards. Organizations tend to knock on the door and say, hey, here's a bunch of really cool tools. Why don't you go and experiment with it? And I think that's probably also where we have seen mixed results along the way. We know that accessibility doesn't necessarily mean adoption. We know that adoption doesn't necessarily need productivity. And it's in that space where making sure that you have a proper change management process, around that, and support and governance, is one of the factors that is going to make a difference on that, on that particular journey, which I think is a little bit the harder journey compared to the other one. I mean, the first one, don't get me wrong, it's also challenging and very impactful, and in some cases it does come with some job reductions along the way. But the second one, and what I would say also in this particular change that we are experiencing is no one wants to be left behind. I when I was working years ago in TQM or Six Sigma or other new improvements, I rarely came across people knocking on the door saying, hey, I've heard about this, please give me a little bit of this medicine. But here, we're all obsessed, like no one wants to be left behind. So there's an anxiety, there is certainly FOMO in a big way. It's like, okay, I need to be attuned with it. While at the same time, some of the tools are phenomenal, but it does get some trial and error to say, oh, how do I really become more productive on this at the individual level? So let me pause there.
Yeah. I think it's really fascinating what you're describing, Jorge, because absolutely we're seeing this with clients that we've worked with. And I'm interested to dig a little bit deeper into that, the sort of mixed results or the mixed impacts that you said. And in particular, what do you see that's different when, people are, say, for example, or anywhere, when they are, adopting, and it's working. So, and it's leading towards, results. What's practically different? And also, where does the tension lay? What's not changing when you see that there's, resistance, or when you see that the adoption or change isn't sticking in an organization? I'm really curious to see what you see there.
So first observation would be, look, this is it's a complicated recipe. If and I love food, so a lot of ingredients need to be right, and I think too many organizations maybe take a simplistic approach. I think we're leaving behind the period where there was this perception that is all about the technology. You buy the technology, you buy the, like in the old days, you buy the software and suddenly, we're all more productive, which was not always the case, by the way. So I think that making sure that we don't fall in love with the technology, whatever AI tool you're going to be using, it's important. I think there's something to be said about data readiness, or in fact, AI readiness, I should say. Where are you in that, in that journey? You need to have a strong self-awareness as an organization before you embark in this, in this journey. If your data is not where it needs to be, if your governance is not where it needs to be, if your capabilities are not where they need to be, going and deploying AI for the sake of AI because your competitors are doing it, or because everybody is talking about it, or because everybody is spending money on it, is probably not the smartest way to do that. You need to make sure that you do a AI readiness assessment. You need to make sure that your data is where it needs to be. You need to make sure that the capabilities, the skills, the mindsets required for this. This is just not a technology change. This is a human change that we're really talking about. So, on the other hand, organizations that grasp that have that level of authenticity in a sense, I see those organizations doing much better. And maybe I've been lucky enough with organizations like Sitecore as well as Sage, where the product is also AI driven. So we are in the business of it. And when you position it to your customer, again, it's not about the technology. It's about what is it going to do for me. What is the real bottom line impact of your AI solution? How am I going to be closer to my customer, more knowledgeable of the data, be able to take, faster and quicker, decisions, be able to optimize my workforce so that they do more of the added value work, and somehow, I've got agents doing more of the less value added work. How am I faster than the competition? Those are the kind of questions, both, from a customer perspective, but also internally, that's the question that we all want answers, for, not just being able to say, oh yeah, I'm phenomenal at prompting. It's like, well, that's great. What does lead you to? What are you getting out of that?
It's a really good point, actually. And I've heard a couple of things I just wanted to check in on your views on. One is, before you joined us, Nejmi and I were just discussing, you mentioned change management and the change process. So my first question is, do you see this adoption of AI and the move into an AI era as a radically different form of change management, or actually is it, are there lots of consistent elements to it? It's just, the tool that or the thing that we're aiming towards is different, but broadly speaking, the change process is going to be similar.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I just completed about a couple of weeks ago an LSE, at the London School of Economics. I did a diploma on AI. It was 6 to 7 months, different modules and so forth. I can tell you, there was a module right in the middle that was all about change.
Right.
And a lot of the models that were shared with us were models that I have seen in the past.
Yeah.
So, you can do change management better or worse. There are slightly new techniques along the way. Sometimes the labels, change. But human nature remains quite consistent. Most of us, get threatened. Most of us want security. Most of us are change reluctant, unless we can see up front that is a phenomenal change. So yeah, I'm ready to change if I'm going to win the lottery. That's an easy one. But other than that, my natural reaction is going to be, oh, hold on, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for my family? What does it mean for my colleagues, and so forth? So in that, I think we would be well served looking back a little bit to solid, validated change management practices as we embark on this, on this journey. What is certainly changing is the pace of change. And I'm not saying, anything new, but I think that if you look into the evolution of the AI models, if you subscribe to any AI newsletters, and there are a bunch of them, you will absolutely every week be surprised by a new release of a new tool, a new advancement that is going even farther and so forth. I think that's a bit of that level of speed I have not seen, around that. And it's easy to be a little bit bamboozled, frankly, through that. Even how things are priced, we are beginning to see, a movement towards price by consumption. We didn't used to care so much about tokens, and now we all know, the price of the token and what does it mean for each one of us, and so, and so forth. But Glenn, I would go back to some of the basics of change management, of human nature, of how we navigate this space are going to remain, the same. The same way that I think that what makes us human will remain, hopefully, there too. Our ability to empathize, our ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, our ability to be, creative. Those are some of the domains that I think we need to, to preserve. And we have to make sure that whatever AI solutions we put in place, keep that humanity, in place. I don't want to be in an organization, and I'm not lucky enough, where we now, instead of the old saying, remember computer said no, and you're like, okay, this is the end of the process. Now it's AI says no, and I cannot tell you why. It's like, well, that's not good enough. My customers, our colleagues, want to understand, what is the output in that sense.
I would just, so what I'm hearing is a couple of things that I think are particularly relevant for our audience. One is that HR functions themselves will have a very central role in this, because you've got not just change, but you've then got sort of behavior change to sort of encourage the organization to adopt. And that probably is not going to be done if an organization takes the decision to just dump this on the CTO, right, and just make it a tech thing. Because as you've said in several different ways, it's a deeply human change that we are trying, which is a bit ironic, bearing in mind that the product is not human. But there's so very central role of HR and very central role, I'm guessing, more locally, of individual leaders and function heads to help drive this through the organization, because it's not going to be embedded if it stays just an HR initiative. Would that be fair?
That's absolutely fair. I mean, I would probably argue that there hasn't been a more exciting time to be part of HR. Looking back, I think the opportunities that we have in the different organizations that we work with or for are phenomenal. And you're right. If you leave AI deployment exclusively on the hands of your CTO, you are unlikely to get all the results, because this is a human transformation as well as a technology, deployment. But it has to be, hand in glove, type of, way forward. Now, I do think that even as a function, we're probably going to become more efficient. But that would give us, I think we're a great example of, as a function, being able to spend more time with the business, having these strategic, conversations, looking to the future, and less time making sure that our data is accurate, which we have spent as an HR function, many years. Hopefully, this will simplify our tech ecosystem. I think that the old days where HR generalists were bombarded with questions, of all sorts, are going to be reduced, because they will have, highly interactive bots that will answer, frankly, 99.9% of the questions in a friendly, empathetic, way, while we can have all the kind of conversations with the business. So I do think it's an exciting time to be part of the HR function.
Yeah, I agree. It really feels like a lot of the language in what's described, both from an opportunity and a threat maybe perspective. You mentioned, FOMO, not wanting to be left behind. There's like anxiety, but then at the same time, opportunity, right? To be spending more time doing higher value added activities for people function, to have, even more influence within the organization around this, transformation and beyond. And it feels like fundamentally within that, there's this sort of leadership like lever, perhaps, because we're talking about, psychology of adoption, and what's involved in helping organizations and teams and people to move forward. And I'm really curious, what do you think is the difference maker for a leader or an organization with leadership capability that is enabling transformation or adoption? What do you feel is the difference maker for any sort of leader to help navigate through that very human change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think probably have a couple of views on that. I would probably argue that a great leader, or not all, but many great leaders will manage this well, because I think that what makes them great leaders will serve them well through the AI, transformational support that they need, to go through. And likewise, I would say the ones that are likely to be in trouble are the ones that were maybe not so strong, maybe the ones that were not great at listening, because I do think that in this period, listening is absolutely critical. Maybe they were the ones that were not that good at, role modeling, because I do think that role modeling, using tools yourself, being curious yourself, is absolutely critical in that space. I think those that are, adverse to experimenting are likely to do poorly in this time. But if you like experimenting and you do A/B testing and you encourage your organization, your team, to do that, you will do much better. So I see some of the fundamental leadership capabilities of great leaders is still very, very relevant into that self-awareness that we were talking about. It's fundamental both at the organizational level but also at the individual level. Or how do I feel about this? We now have CEOs that can have conversations with virtual boards in preparation for board conversations. Do they embrace that? Some of them do. Do they feel threatened by that? We've had, at least a couple of organizations, I think, including Zuckerberg, that has been playing with creating, twin CEOs that their organizations could interact with. Is that a threat? Is it not? The ability to really step back and also, decide what's the right pace for my organization, for my team. Nejmi, to your comment in reference to this FOMO and desire to not to lose out, is also interesting to see, how folks like the CEO of Anthropic and others, DeepMind comes to mind, they're saying, oh, we should really slow down this thing. We just, this is extremely powerful. Some of our latest releases, could create havoc. Let's think about slowing down. But no one does.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to be, the first one to slow down, because there's not enough trust, across the world, frankly, to let someone else overtake you and so forth. Now, at the micro level, you can decide what's the right pace of deployment, when it comes to AI for my organization, and how do I manage that tension between going too fast or being left, behind. Those are terrific questions for great leaders to play with, in a sense, to wrestle with is probably a better word around that. But I'm optimistic by nature, and I do think that great leaders, someone who was a great leader 5 years ago, if they have kept on with some of those capabilities, they're probably relatively well positioned, as long as they are not threatened, as long as they are curious, as long as they're open. Those things would absolutely help.
Yeah, I just want to
Go for it.
just take a moment to sort of break your fourth wall a little bit, and to say, dear listener, that's your homework. If you take anything from this conversation, certainly take that prompt there to consider the pace of adoption and pace of change. Are you leading your team at the right pace? Do you need to speed up, slow down? How do you know? And really wrestle with that. I think that's a good prompt in the spirit of AI conversation to ask yourself, rather than our AI overlords, to consider, because I think it was a fantastic prompt that left me with something to think about.
Yeah. If we can extend that then to your area of expertise, particularly, Jorge, in terms of the talent agenda, what's top of mind for you now, as you sort of begin your career at Sitecore, and what might you have been considering as you left Sage in relation specifically to talent, both the development internally of talent, but also attracting talent, into the organization with the kind of through the AI lens and that sort of topic we're chatting about today?
Yeah. So in the talent space, there's so much. If you look at the recruitment, a part of it, I think funnel management is going to be so much improved by the different AI tools. We are deploying a new tool here in Sitecore that we're all very excited about, that will make a huge difference on how we interact with candidates, how we interact with managers, how we can streamline things, how we can obtain greater information and leverage insights towards action. I think when it comes to coaching, as an example, coaching used to be a privilege frankly. It used to be reserved for the C-suite, on the odd occasion. We now have the ability to coach, in a very democratic way, so to speak, in a very cost efficient way. We are experimenting with that. So if someone's going to have a tough conversation tomorrow, they can have a virtual interaction based on all of our expertise that we've built through time, and be much better equipped in order to do that. I think the world of simulations is also going to improve in a big way, and I'm excited about some of the future learning interventions that are going to be able to provide more of that simulated, realistic, frankly, opportunities. So there's plenty in the talent space that I think AI is going to touch. We'll be better able to succession plan. We'll get to hopefully get to know people's capabilities better. I mean, these days, in our case, because we are a Microsoft, among other tools, but I'm pretty sure that between Teams, Outlook, and all the different conversations that ChatGPT and all the Copilot prompting that I've been doing for the last 3 months, they've got a pretty damn good sense of who I am, what am I good at, what should I, I should be more succinct, because I'm always not as succinct as I want to be. All of those things, they know me well. And if I said, hey, give me a capability assessment, and by the way, no sugar coating. Why do you see me doing well? Why don't you see doing me well? I mean, that's fascinating. And for a lot of people, it's less threatening than having even that same conversation with your boss. They find it much easier to go to an AI, tool, whatever the tool of their choice, and said, hey, give it to me. Come on, that rough feedback. What do I really need to get better at? So I think there's plenty of opportunities, Glenn, in that, space.
I couldn't agree with you more. Honestly, I think it's something that we've said a few times on this podcast in more recent recordings, but it is becoming increasingly clear to me that using the tool to get better at using the tool, and also getting better at performing better, are a key. But it's not perfect. But to your point, lots of organisations couldn't afford to have Nejmi and I coach, further down an organisation than that top sort of 4 or 5%. But you can use the tools to give that capability, to develop capability all the way through the organisation. So then there's something about how do you get the adoption for the benefit of those things, as well as some of the very much task-oriented capability that you're looking to develop. I think it's that leveraging it for improved performance of the individual, both in terms of what we might have, I hate this phrase, by the way, we might have classed soft skills, as well as the more harder skills, I think is still feels to me like that's a space not leveraged as much as it might be. And it's maybe where we talked about this being a deeply human transformation. Well, you need better humans then. But use the tech to build better humans.
Yeah. And it's 24/7. And to be honest, sometimes the feedback might be better quality than a conversation with.
Surely not measuring. Come on.
However, what there would be lacking is the accountability to do anything with it, right? Like often that a private conversation with oneself, tooling, is not necessarily as impactful as having a similar conversation with someone whom you feel accountable to go and do the difficult thing or the challenging thing or whatnot.
And it's important to remember, at least a couple of things, that AI ain't perfect. I mean, we all hear the stories about the hallucination. They're still happening. They haven't gone away. We've all heard the stories of how difficult sometimes it is to explain, the decisions or recommendations that they come with. So that challenge of explainability is still very much, there. As tempting as sometimes it might be to feel that I've got a real new friend, it is not a human that you're interacting with. Okay, let's remember, because it can be very tempting. The way that my mom, who is in her 70s, sometimes tells me about the interaction she's having, with her favorite AI tool. Mom, you do know that's not a real person, okay? Let's make clear about that. Because humans, we like to humanize. We start with that in childhood. All the way from very early stages, we take that teddy bear and we make them a real person. Well, at least I did. We've got this tendency of that. The language that we have used to describe AI is a very human, language, all the way from the label that we have put in place. So we just need to be cautious that it's absolutely not perfect, like many people point out. We need to be cautious along the way. We do need good data. We do need good governance around that, particularly as we are empowering more and more those systems to make decisions along the way. But I think again, being an optimistic, I'm very glad that I'm in this living this period, because this is going to be quite a remarkable transformation, and who knows where we will be in 10 to 15 years, but it will be quite a few steps ahead of where we are now, for sure.
Yeah. I've got something just quickly popped into my head as you were saying that, which might be a conversation for another time, because it feels quite big. But I wonder if you've thought about this at all, which is, if you couple the distraction of social media in all its guises, and you couple that with the possible distraction of AI tools, I quite happily can while away an hour or two, chatting with Claude or ChatGPT, and then I realize actually I haven't done any thinking myself, and I've not focused on the thing that I'm meant to be focusing on. So I'm really interested at the moment in this topic about focus and sort of intelligence capital, and how we might be eroding some of that with these tools. Any thoughts on that at this relatively early stage, and how you might be seeing that play through in the organization?
Yeah, a few thoughts around that, Glenn, because I think you bring a very good, very, very good point, which is the secondary impact of some of these deployments, initiatives, tools that that we're using, and I'm hoping that we get better at anticipating this. I don't know how many years it took for society to realize that smoking was not really very good. I get the sense that we knew way before we took action, but let's assume that it took us a while to really come to truth with that. It has taken us 15 years to realize that social media is not great for our youth. I hope we get better at figuring out those challenges on the way, so that we can act much earlier on. Because I agree, I think we are probably losing attention in some aspects. I think that the shoots of dopamine that we all get when we scroll down, well, maybe they were not anticipated by the chap that invented the scrolling, but a few years later we absolutely, and all the marketeers know what it takes to gain your attention and remain you focused and lead you in that way. So I hope that we've got both the foresight and the courage as organizations, as individuals, as society, to say, hold on, let's look at that. What's the second level of, I mean, there's a lot of debate at the moment, if a lot of the junior tasks, become automated, well, how do I gain expertise? How do I jump from where I am to where I need to be if this early part of my career, which I was going to be doing some, let's call it simpler task, but that build onto, how do you go there? It's very difficult, if you don't have. So we need to figure out what's the ladder like. And people in the talent space, in the HR community, we are very well placed to ask some of those questions and figure what the new ladder would look like, because it will emerge eventually. But, the more work we put into it, the less people that get displaced because of that, the more that we can, reassign people in that direction, the better we will be. But there are certainly consequences that we are just not conscious enough, or if we're conscious enough, we're happy to disregard them and said, well, I guess it's not such a big deal that I don't read anymore. I'm like, oh my God, a world without reading. No, I don't want to be part of that.
No, it's great. Yeah, really cool. Well, look, I'm mindful of time. I think that'd be a lovely conversation to come back to again. I've just finished reading a book called Stolen Focus, actually, which talks very much to that idea. And apparently the guy that did invent the infinite scrolling actually is rather regretful that he did. but also knows, to your point about courage, that the social media companies could turn that off, that function, very quickly, but they choose not to, for all the reasons that we were probably very aware of. So really interested. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for bringing both your experience, but as I said right at the top of the show, a kind of considered approach that you've got to this. You can tell you've done not just your LSE course, but some deep thinking of it on it. So love to have you back on the program at some point to see, where your thinking's evolved to, maybe in a while's time. But this has been fab and really helpful for listeners to get your view on it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Look, I think the world of work is fascinating. We all spend a heck of a lot of time in that space. So anything that any one of us can do to make it a little bit better, challenge our thinking, is always welcome. So Nejmi, very much appreciate the questions. And Glenn, always good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Good stuff.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
See you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.